Welcome to Viewpoints. I'm Chris Graham.
And I'm Crystal Graham.
We're all watching the Olympics right now. Of course, the games in Rio have our attention, and we're among the millions of viewers here in the States watching the games, and we're watching a lot of games, Crystal, that we don't often watch outside of the every 4 years kind of aspect.
I'm so excited. I have such Olympic fever. All these wonderful sports that you never watch any other time that you get the opportunity to watch now. We've watched a little bit of water polo. You were watching archery.
Archery, I was watching table tennis. I play table tennis occasionally, and it's a lot of fun. And of course, the big name sports, basketball, swimming gets a lot of attention during the Olympics. Oh yeah, of
diving.
course. The gymnastics get so much, and track and field is also exciting. And so, it's that time of year. We've been looking forward to this for months now. The Rio Games, and of course, all the headlines around the Rio Games. A lot of negative headlines, of course, about whether or not Brazil was prepared for the games. Of course, all the political and economic upheaval there too. And among the points of discussion, Crystal, has been the fear of something called Zika, a four-letter word that we've heard a lot about, but I don't think we know an awful lot about.
Well, it kept a number of athletes out of the games and a number of spectators who might normally have attended. There was some question as to whether or not they should. A lot of people came out and said maybe you shouldn't travel to Brazil. And so there have been a lot of headlines related to Zika. And so tonight we plan to explore Zika and its impact not only on the Rio Olympics, but also here in Virginia.
That's right, and we have a couple of guests with us here who are experts in the health field who will help us walk through that process. First, we want to welcome Laura Cornegay. She's the health director at the Central Shenandoah Health District. Laura, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate the opportunity to get this public message out.
That's right, and along with Laura, we have Jonathan Falk, a district epidemiologist. Jonathan, welcome, and tell us what an epidemiologist does and is.
Well, thank you. Basically, as an epidemiologist, we study the distribution and determinants of disease within a population, kind of looking at who is getting sick, where, and why, and kind of use that information to try to prevent additional cases going forward.
Gotcha. So a little bit of the lay of the land there. Now, I was going to jokingly reference, everybody has mosquitoes in their backyard. It's summertime in the South. If you're watching this, you're in Virginia, most likely. And, I got bit by a couple mosquitoes yesterday. Crystal did as well.
5 mosquitoes yesterday, yes.
And so, I think the average viewer out there, if you've heard anything about Zika, your first thought is, man, Crystal better watch out, her head's going to get smaller. I say that jokingly because, of course, I think a lot about the fear of Zika is the fear of the unknown. And maybe first, Jonathan, tell us about what is Zika? What is the disease, and what do we have maybe to worry about there?
Well, Zika is a virus, and it is a virus that is spread mostly or primarily by mosquitoes, specifically Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus. And what can happen, generally, for the normal person, the CDC says roughly 80% of cases are asymptomatic, meaning they don't show any signs and symptoms. But for those that do, we've seen fever, we've seen conjunctivitis, rash, pain in the joints. There are a few others that go along with that too. But then specifically with pregnant women, if they end up developing a Zika virus infection, there is a risk of a number of different types of birth defects, namely microcephaly. And then there's also a small percentage of folks have also developed Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is sort of a paralyzation kind of symptom that can result from Zika virus.
It makes a lot of big headlines right now, Zika.
Yes.
President Obama said funding for this is getting to a critical level. Yet, when you, and so you see the big headlines, you see congressmen coming out saying that Congress needs to come back from break to come fund this issue. Yet we're not seeing it in huge amounts here in the United States. As far as the actual mosquitoes here in the United States, it seems like Florida has a 1 square mile area around Miami that we actually have the mosquitoes here and cases of it. So is this critical in the United States?
It's something that we're always focused on. Whenever we talk about new and emerging diseases, that always has the risk of causing larger issues within our populations, because you have a number of people who've never been exposed to it, so you have a lot of susceptible people. There could be severe disease conditions that result from it. So whether that was 2009 H1N1 pandemic flu, whether that was Ebola, whether that's Zika, the Virginia Department of Health and we at the local health department kind of have our role in trying to protect folks in our communities and trying to identify these cases of disease wherever they may be. But in terms of case counts, as of August 4th, so I think last Thursday, Virginia had 56 cases. We're part of the Northwest region, and we had 7 cases confirmed. All those have been travel associated. So that's one of the big questions when we first get someone kind of reported to the health department and we begin our follow-up. We're trying to ask a lot of different questions, and one of them, of course, is whether or not you've traveled, and if so, where and when.
Remind our viewers out there to join us on our live discussion as the show goes on. Please join us on Facebook on the WVPT page, also the Augusta Free Press page. As maybe throw your questions out there about Zika. Of course, we're talking with our experts now, but we'd love to have the questions that you want to have answered about Zika. Let's bring Laura into the discussion. Laura, your background you've been with the Central Shenandoah Health District for a year now.
Correct.
Your background in internal medicine in the Lexington Rockbridge area. From a local perspective, as Jonathan mentioned, I think 56 cases in Virginia, all of those travel associated. What do you think that the average person out there watching the show today needs to know about Zika and their risk, their exposure?
Our primary message at Virginia Department of Health is a prevention message, preventing mosquito bites personally and preventing mosquito breeding sites around your home. So personally, things that you can do to prevent mosquito bites would be wearing EPA approved repellents, wearing long sleeves, long pants, light colors. Certainly keeping mosquitoes out of your home. Using screening, keeping doors closed. The Aedes mosquitoes that are the vectors for Zika virus are daytime biters, although they can bite at night, but daytime is their most prevalent time for biting. So trying to avoid being out, and if you're out, just being protected, using mosquito repellent. Certainly around your property, these mosquitoes are container breeders. They don't breed in ponds or puddles. They breed in plastic buckets, bird baths, things that you may have around your house. So generally what we recommend is just kind of policing your property and tipping, tossing, and covering about once a week. If you have a bird bath that accumulates water, trying to tip that out or wash it out once a week. You can even go to the hardware store and get mosquito repellents that you can put in standing water to try to keep the mosquito breeding population down. So those are things that you can do to protect both yourself and your property.
That's certainly if you're talking about here in Virginia. I would assume, but maybe not assume, that people who travel a lot would already be aware of what they need to do to protect themselves. But in case maybe you've had a long planned trip to South America, one of those bucket list kind of things to do, and you hadn't really put a lot of thought to this, for people who do travel to countries where Zika is in outbreak status, what are the recommendations there?
Yeah, I think again, personal protection against mosquito bites, bringing that mosquito repellent, having long sleeves, long pants, trying to avoid mosquito bites to the best of your ability. The CDC also recommends that pregnant women consider not traveling to areas where Zika is endemic. And unfortunately, that's a lot of nice vacation spots these days, South America, Mexico, areas, within the Caribbean. If you do have to travel, definitely, bring in that mosquito repellent and trying to protect yourself to the best of your ability.
And when you get back to the United States after travel of that nature, is there some period of time or something like that you should be watching for symptoms?
There is. As Jonathan said, about 80% of people who acquire Zika may not have symptoms. If you do develop symptoms, most common ones are joint aches, fever, conjunctivitis, or rash. And certainly if you develop any of those symptoms, calling your healthcare provider and talking with them and getting evaluated. The usual period in which you would develop symptoms about 3 to 14 days after being exposed to the virus. And the CDC recommends that if you go to Zika endemic areas, that you try to avoid mosquito bites for about 3 weeks after returning. And that way you're protecting the people around you from, potentially transmitting the virus to local mosquitoes. Luckily, one of the things that Virginia Department of Health is doing now is doing mosquito surveillance, doing mosquito trapping in various areas of the state and looking for any evidence of Zika virus transmission within those mosquitoes. And at this point, we've not found any, which is great news for us.
Yeah, I was going to ask, bring Jonathan back in. From an epidemiology perspective, Is this something, I know we don't know a lot about Zika. That part of what Congress is talking about in terms of research is to just fund more research so that we can learn more about Zika. Is this something that, and I think you addressed this earlier, but kind of want to hit this point again, is this something we have to worry about, like that can maybe strengthen? Is this something, a virus that can get stronger, can maybe cause more damage than it causes now? Because as you said, 80% of cases don't even involve anybody even noticing they have it. A lot of those other cases are people who have mild symptoms. It may look like a flu or allergy or something like that. It really affects pregnant women, obviously, and causes the microcephaly. But is it something we have to worry about that could strengthen over time?
I think that there is a lot of research going on right now, especially since 2015 through right now. There has been a very large increase in research papers that have been done, and that's certainly a big question about whether or not this virus is one that will change or mutate over time, and that's something that always is a concern when we have these new and emerging diseases, because they will potentially adapt to the populations that they're infecting. When West Nile virus kind of came on the scene in 1999 through the early 2000s, that was something where it came in through New York and just kind of swept through the entire U.S. We haven't seen that with dengue or chikungunya viruses, and we're not seeing it so far with Zika, but that's obviously a big concern because just like with Brazil, once and if it becomes established, and kind of starts moving through the U.S., we don't know exactly how far it'll be able to do that and what kind of impact that will have on the healthcare system if we start seeing cases like we have been in some of the other countries.
Mm-hmm.
Are any work being done right now related to vaccines for this virus?
There are a number of companies that are in the process of doing some research and trials with vaccines to Zika virus. It's interesting though, there are considerations for something like this that you don't normally think about, but for a Zika virus vaccine, that may be something that's fine and could potentially work in a place like the U.S., but for areas that are actually endemic to a different virus called dengue virus, there are potentially problems with having someone have immunity to, say, Zika virus, because there's, with dengue virus, there's sort of like a first type of infection and then a secondary, more severe infection that can potentially happen. And that's one question, is that would that be a risk for someone who, say, is in a dengue endemic area? If they get the Zika virus vaccine, but then they get exposed to the dengue virus for the first time, are we causing a more severe illness of dengue virus because they had the vaccine?
Interesting. Bringing it back to Rio too, with so much attention on the games and then a lot of things about the Summer Olympics. There was a concern, as we referenced earlier in the show, a number of high-name athletes, particularly golfers. There were a lot of golfers who backed out of the Olympics because of fear of Zika, and what they cited was fear of the unknown. I think in a lot of ways, there was a letter from a number of scientists, bioethicists who questioned whether or not the game should even go on. Maybe the game should either be canceled or moved. We've seen studies since then. I think there was a Yale School of Public Health study that came out about a month ago that suggested that the possible incidence of Zika related to the games themselves will be very limited. I think I saw numbers of less than 100 people potentially by their study that would be impacted by traveling to Rio. I want to ask the epidemiologist now your thoughts on weighing all the studies that have been done, the experts and bioethicists weighing in. Is this something that because people are in Rio now, will be going back home after these Olympics are over? Is there a fear that we're going to cause Zika to spread more quickly as a result of the Olympics being held?
That is a good question, and I think that's definitely an unknown. In that particular situation, one of the biggest things that we want are for our physicians and our healthcare facilities to really be aware of, that this event is going on. This was a risk for people who have traveled. If you see folks that match this type of description, call the health department, consult with us, and we try to figure out a way to potentially get them tested to figure out whether or not they would match our case definition or not. And then, like Dr. Kornegay mentioned, in general, just providing basic education if you did go on these trips, if you have traveled abroad and you're coming back, to kind of prevent mosquito bites, because not only do we want you to prevent getting bitten by mosquitoes there, but on the off chance that you did contract Zika or another mosquito-borne virus and you come back here, we want to make sure that the mosquitoes here don't pick that up from you.
Laura, In the Central Shenandoah Health District, that encompasses a pretty wide area, right?
It does, it does.
So I want you to tell us a little bit about the area, but are you getting calls right now related to the Zika virus? Are pregnant women or other people concerned when they get a mosquito bite?
Sure. Well, Central Shenandoah is a large area. It goes from Rockingham in the south, encompasses Stanton, Augusta, Waynesboro, Rockbridge, and then Highland and Bath counties. So most of your viewing area. And we have gotten a lot of calls with concerns. We've tried to reach out, particularly to the OBGYN community, and make them aware of, messaging to give their patients. As Jonathan said, one of our main concerns is for pregnant women or even women who are considering pregnancy. Get a lot of questions for folks who have traveled recently to Zika endemic areas, and considering pregnancy, what would their recommendation be? And at this point, the CDC says that if you're considering conception and you've been to a Zika endemic area, probably waiting about 8 weeks before considering a pregnancy. If you haven't had any symptoms of Zika, would be current recommendations. For men who are considering pregnancy with their partner, again, if they haven't had any symptoms of Zika but have been to a Zika endemic country, again, waiting 8 weeks to consider conceiving. Zika virus, unfortunately, can last a lot longer in semen than it does in blood. So if men develop Zika virus, the CDC recommends waiting about 6 months before considering conception with their partner.
Those are good guidelines because it is something that, as we've talked about in the show, you don't really know you have it for the most part. Most people who have Zika don't even know they have it. And so we all get bitten by mosquitoes. And so those incubation periods, those are very conservative, it sounds like, to make
Yes.
sure that we prevent the incidents there from reoccurring. From a research standpoint, then, Crystal mentioned that the political debates going on in Congress. And of course, Zika is a quick word to say. It starts with a Z, so it has some zest to it. And yet it's become a political football now. And a lot of things have actually in Congress, not just with this political election season, but health research in general. I know when the Ebola virus was heavy in the news a year or two ago, that there was a lot of posturing on that issue too. Where does Zika and the need for research stand in you guys' minds in terms of the importance? I mean, there's so many things we can spend money on, and only so many resources we have available. Where should this fit from that standpoint?
Right. I think there are a lot of unknowns at this point in Zika, and even in the last few months, we found out new things about the virus. We knew a few months ago, we confirmed, sexual transmission from males to females. Probably about a month or two ago, there was a concern in New York for transmission from female to male. So that's something new. There's a lot that we don't know about, how many pregnancies may be affected by Zika, and one of the things that the CDC has developed is a U.S. Pregnancy registry, so that we can build a really robust database and figure out, what the complications of Zika would be for infants. We can register pregnant women who either test positive for Zika or have inconclusive testing for Zika into the registry, and we follow them, at the time of diagnosis. We follow them at the second and third trimester at birth, and then also follow the infants at the time of birth, 2 months, 6 months, and 12 months. So over the course of time, hopefully we'll develop a really robust database and know a lot more about this virus.
We're talking a little bit about women and pregnancy, but we haven't really talked about the bigger issue, which is what is actually happening to some of these women who are pregnant with the Zika virus and the birth defects that are associated with that. Laura, if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, the main concern with Zika virus is its association with microcephaly, or small heads, and small brain development in infants. Unfortunately, we don't know how often that occurs, and it certainly doesn't happen in every pregnancy. It's important that if women are pregnant and diagnosed with Zika virus, that they follow closely with their obstetrician. And typically the recommendations at this point would be that they would get ultrasounds about every 8 to 12 weeks, just to look at, the skull and brain development. And then, like I said, our hope is that people would opt to be part of the Zika pregnancy registry, and then we'd have data, for the birth and the child for the first year of life.
Guillain-Barré syndrome, you mentioned that earlier, Jonathan, is something else is associated. We don't know, I guess from what I've read, we don't know the exact links between Zika and Guillain-Barré, but we know that is something that can be devastating to a person. It can be fatal. It can also cause paralysis. Talk about what we know about the links between the two.
We've seen that in some individuals after they've been infected with the Zika virus. And Guillain-Barré progresses very quickly. I'm not sure exactly how best to describe it, but it's basically a condition where you develop paralysis and you kind of lose function over your entire body. And if you don't have supportive control or supportive help, say from like a healthcare facility, then it can ultimately be fatal. And so, again, it hasn't been in a large proportion of those cases that we've seen, but it is a complication that we have been seeing.
One person in Virginia, I believe in Chesapeake, has died from the Zika virus. I believe an elderly person. Is that what we're talking about happened there, or is if you're young or old, are you more susceptible to die from this disease?
I think that kind of speaks to what Dr. Kornegay was saying. There's more research that needs to be done, and that's part of where EPI and our work as a health department comes in, because each case that we're able to document and follow through on, we can kind of put together a bigger picture of just how many of these folks do develop Guillain-Barré, how many of these pregnant women do end up having children with microcephaly, how many of these cases are actually fatal, and get a kind of a bigger and better picture of Zika virus currently. And then once we have that sort of baseline, then it's easier for us to kind of see over time, is this virus changing or causing a difference in symptoms as it kind of progresses.
I know we talked about specific to the Central Shenandoah Health District. Do we have any confirmed cases within our health district that we know of right now?
The way we report statistics within Virginia Department of Health is just by large regions.
Gotcha.
So the
Okay.
Central Shenandoah Health District is part of the Northwest region, so kind of that northwest corner of the state. So we've had 6 cases within the Northwest region, and as Jonathan said, about 56 cases in the state as a whole. In the U.S., there's been just about 1,800 cases of Zika virus. And last week, Florida obviously reported the first local transmission cases of Zika, and they had 6 local transmission cases in Florida. Luckily, that's one of the things that we're monitoring for at Virginia Department of Health is any evidence of local transmission, and we have not seen that at all within Virginia.
We're talking about Zika a lot right now, but it's not a brand new thing. Zika was actually discovered some time ago. Jonathan, perhaps you know the history of that a little bit as far as the Zika virus, and South America, I think, is where it was discovered. Or Laura,
No,
is that better for you?
It was Africa.
I thought it was
Yeah,
South Africa.
so it was
Okay.
actually the Zika forest in Uganda in
Okay.
1947, and then there were sporadic cases within Africa and some parts of Asia for some years. Really in 2015 was the first time that we saw it in the Western Hemisphere, and that's where we saw local transmission of the Zika virus in Brazil, and that's where it got everybody's attention. So it's been around for a long time. It's hard to say how many cases it may have caused between 1947 and now because, many people, may have been asymptomatic. But certainly getting a lot of attention now with the local transmission in Brazil, and then certainly the connection with microcephaly is the thing that caused a lot of attention turned to this virus.
Probably a perfect storm of the fact that it's really taken hold in Brazil, and Brazil happens to be in our focus internationally because of the Olympics. And Brazil's a huge country, 200 million population. They've had 120,000 cases from the research that we've done, and so there's a lot of attention on Brazil. There's a lot of cases going on, and always when you hear about the birth defects issues, that those will definitely get people's attention. So, but it is interesting to note that history. It's almost 70 years ago it was discovered. It's not something that just popped up.
Right.
It's something we're talking about, and learning about more now. So that's good perspective on that.
It is. We do want to invite you again to join the conversation. If you have some questions for our guest today that we haven't had the opportunity to ask, please feel free to weigh in on the Facebook page. You can join us on WVPT's Facebook page, or online at AugustaFreePress.com to continue the conversation. We're close to wrapping up here. Time goes quickly, but I did want to give you guys just an opportunity to kind of weigh in one last time with, for people who are watching here in Virginia, just what the final thought should be, what they should take away from Zika and how it affects them on a daily basis. Jonathan, we'll start with you.
Ultimately, I think the biggest thing that I would want folks to know is that, with the health department, we are sort of embedded in this local community, working with providers, working with the hospitals, working with OBGYN, and really trying to continue to monitor for these cases. Just like any sort of emerging disease, it's something that we don't quite have written in stone. There's a list of reportable disease conditions that there's physicians and hospitals report to us. And occasionally with these new and emerging diseases, that's not necessarily on the list, but it's a public health concern. And so, we try to bring about awareness among those folks in the healthcare field, and just have, try to make sure that they know you can contact us, consult with us, and we try to work with them regarding testing, follow-up, treatment, and trying to protect or prevent other cases in the community.
Dr. Cornegay?
Right. I think the main thing at this point is really the prevention message, keeping yourself and your family safe from mosquito bites, really policing your property and making sure that you don't have mosquito breeding sites, around your property. And that's the biggest thing that each individual can do. And then certainly reaching out to the local health department as a source of information and education. We're always there and more than willing to, field any questions that folks may have.
Well, Crystal, I think the first thing we need to do is go empty those bird feeders out, tip those things over, and get those covered. So.
And the dog pool for the dogs, I think it's time to say goodbye to that, unfortunately.
That's right. Well, I want to thank you for joining us here on Viewpoints, learning more about Zika. I think we know a lot more. I want to thank our guests, Dr. Laura Cornegay and Jonathan Falk from the Central Shenandoah Health District. That wraps us up, Crystal. Great show.
It was a good show, and I'm also going to be using my bug spray, so next time I won't be talking about the 5 bug bites I got yesterday. Thanks for joining us.